Yeah, of course. I just like I brought my beer, but I just realized I finished it already. Yeah, well,
Do you see it's clear? Very clear. The message is clear. We went to conference. Oh,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. What should I be? Maybe should I have some of this like so it looks like product placement.
Yeah.
Let me see. Is our like scope able to breathe? This is Turkish. I know. Do you want to see? Yeah, I've seen them later. Ah, you saw them? Yeah. Huh? Cool? Yeah, I mean, like, we sound check from our, like, sound, but we have sessions in before as well. It's very interesting. Dober večer, dobrodošli na pogovoru z dvema gostoma letošnje Sonike. Zdaj smo v glasbenem delu, zdaj pravkar smo se... Aha, ma saj me slišite. Zaradi streama. Ja. Pravkar smo se vrnili iz Cukrarne, kjer smo se pogovarjali z Katarino Petrovič in Majkom Rinejsem. To je bil vizualni del oziroma pogovor z vizualnimi umetniki na letošnji Soniki. Zdaj pa sledi glasbeni del. Ta je malo drugače zasnovan, v bistvu se bosta pogovarjala z dvema novinarjema, Radia Študent. Ta pogovor organiziramo v sklopu platforme Shape, ki jo tudi najbrž večinoma tukaj že poznate. Sonika je namreč članica mreže 16 festivalov evropskih, namen te platforme je spodbujanje manj uveljavljenih umetnikov, njihova promocija in kroženje po festivalih oziroma večanje njihove prepoznavnosti. In ena od ključnih aktivnosti te mreže je tudi so tudi izobraževalne aktivnosti. Z nami je Machine Woman in ona je tudi letos na platformi Shape, tako da upam, da se boste kaj dotaknila tudi te njene izkušnje. Platforma Shape je pred kratkim imela tudi odprt poziv za prijave. Mota in festival Sonika se vsako leto trudimo, da bi promovirali čim več tudi lokalnih umetnikov. Tako da upam, da ste se prijavili. Prvemu pogovoru pa sledi še pogovor z Uwejem Schmidtom oziroma Atom TM-om in avtorjem, ki ga poznamo tudi pod mnogimi drugimi vzdevki, na primer Atom Heart pa Senior Coconut. Z njim se bo pogovarjal Žiga Petrič. Smo tudi v živo, ta pogovor poteka tudi v živo, tako da pozdravljam tudi vse, ki nas spremljajo po spletu. Zdaj pa bom kar prepustila besedo Ani in Mateju. Še prej pa vas seveda vabim na jutrišnja oba koncerta v Kino Šiška in v Rog, v Kino Šiška Flanger, Atom TM pa Varego Vales in v koncertni dvorani Rog potem berlinski tehno večer z Nino Hodej, R36, Machine Woman in Ziur. Hvala.
Hello? Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay, so first of all, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
I guess the first question to sort of break the ice is how are you and how is your stay in Slovenia so far?
Hello, everybody, as well. I'm very well, thank you. I hope you're well as well. And so far, I'm really start falling in love with Slovenia. It's very beautiful. Yeah, I feel very calm and just very, very nice. Yeah.
Okay. Are you excited for tomorrow and or nervous?
I guess a bit of both, but it always happens like that, and I get nervous the closer and closer I get to a show. So, yeah, I am excited and nervous at the same time.
Okay. Well, the first sort of, I guess, serious question is how would you describe the music you make, or what kind of an artist would you say you are?
You said it was a serious question. I guess I make electronic music with influences I take from lots of different stuff, from Soviet aerobics, exercise vinyl, to Boney M, to more harder techno sound, to even GABA. I've been listening to a lot of GABA lately. So yeah, it's hard to describe myself, but I guess I practice electronic sound with influences from different genres.
I mean, you're often just profiled as a techno artist in media, and but your music is often also like much more experimental. And from your DJ sets, it seems apparent that you don't like actively try to follow one specific genre, and like you experiment a lot with different genres and so on. So I guess I'm wondering, how would you describe your relationship to techno, or how would you describe your music's relationship to techno?
Well, I guess I moved to Berlin a couple of years ago because I really wanted to go to Berghain every day.
Okay.
But I don't go to Berghain every day. I've been like 4 times over the last 2 years. It just hard the sound, and I think it just comes naturally through going clubbing and experiencing that. But my own sound related to techno, I guess it's BPM. You know, sometimes I'll take tech house loop pack, which is like, I don't know, 120, and then I just put it into amp and also put it into 142 BPM, and that becomes techno. So that's my relationship
Okay.
from loop packs to BPM. So I guess, yeah. And influences like being in Berlin, I guess, if I don't get into clubs, which happens quite a lot, just people say not tonight. I'm like, okay, I go home and I still want to party, so I open Ableton and make my own techno. So that's a very intimate relationship with techno I have.
Okay. But you wouldn't describe yourself as strictly just a techno artist, so then.
I guess not.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I guess no.
But I guess do you? This is sort of an awkward question, but do you? Yeah, and you also sort of already sort of answered it, but do you sort of strive to fit into the Berlin scene, or do you like respect it, or do you sort of think it takes itself too seriously, or I mean, are you bothered by how conservative it sometimes seems sound-wise?
Well, I think every scene has got different politics and different issues, and I don't think I ever fit it in somewhere because I always listen to a lot of stuff. But when you meet like-minded people who also don't fit into particular ways or don't want to follow particular ways, so my opinion about the scene, it all depends as well. There's certain clubs and promoters will give a lot of opportunity to new upcoming people and really take chances and risks to book someone who people never heard of, and there's big clubs that will book very well-known artists, and you will know if you go to a certain place, you will hear a specific sound, and it will be full of people because for that purpose. So, if that answers your question.
Yes. I'm sort of wondering if you would say that you're trying to actively be critical of the Berlin scene, or trying to like sort of work around the sort of the strict techno parameters that exist in it.
Actually, I only played in Berlin maybe a couple of times, so I don't even know if I belong in the scene in Berlin. I don't think I belong anywhere, which is really, it's a very strange concept for me now to think. I'm a little bit
Where do you belong?
yes. I'm having existential crisis right now, so I don't know. Critical, you know, it's very, you can have an opinion, and we all have different opinions about different people, different genres, different artists, music, and what have you. But if I don't like something, I just don't go to a place. I don't have the need to come up to someone and say, you know, that sucked. But, you know, your DJ track like suck, like don't DJ. It's like, I'm more excited to come to people and say how much I love this set. So critical is, it's very complicated process to criticize someone, because I don't know if I have a right to criticize other people.
Okay. Then how do you experience these sort of genre-based limitations in your creative process? Just when you create music, but you know, you're still sort of working within some genre-based limitations, I guess. How would you describe your creative process in that sense, in relation to these limitations, I guess?
I try not to limit myself, so musically. So I usually work at night and in headphones, so no one hears what I do. And I can start with recording my voice, turn it into some kind of samples for drum rack in Ableton, and then end up making deep house. Sorry, it's a bit of a dirty word, I guess. I'm having existential crisis right now. And then finish into, going 220 BPM. So I don't limit. To me, I don't look at my music process as work. I look as a game. So I'm just playing, I'm having fun. So there's no limit to my games.
Okay. So yeah, I sort of understood from different interviews with you that you make music on a daily basis. So it's like sort of a form of relaxation, and like just a habit, and it seems very personal and very intuitive. So I was wondering, like, how do you even, when you're making music, how do you even decide when a project is finished, or what project to finish, or like how does this go on?
Finishing tracks has been a big issue for many artists and a lot of my friends who make music. And I used to struggle with that. And I guess the best advice I got from Peter Manfeld, who would tell me about, you finish track, you start and just finish, because if you think it's imperfect, then, it can go on for 6 months. And I know someone who work on one track for 6 months because we're constantly tweaking like every little sound, every little frequency, and changing. But to me, I just do it on the fly, and if I like it, I like it. And very rare, I don't finish track in the same sitting. It's always kind of start, finish, and then it could be like 12-hour session, it could be 5-minute session, but I always, recently, like last 2 years, I was like finish with track when I start. So yeah.
So, but how do you then decide what tracks are like fit for a release, or what tracks are like more important to you, or? something like that?
It's usually the worst tracks happen to be signed
Okay.
for some reason. I don't know. Yeah, to me, my theory, if it sound bad, it's gonna be good.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's very strange how I work. Again, existential crisis right now.
I guess when I was listening your latest EP, it seems like it's apparent it sort of comes from this laid back process. It really seems as if you were primarily making it for yourself or something like that. And a lot of the media, I mean, the reviews also say that that I guess this sort of a laid back attitude is also apparent in these song titles that everyone sort of seems to emphasize. And I guess, would you agree with this perception of you, I guess, not taking yourself too seriously or something like that?
It's very strange because music to me it's like my own therapy. So if I don't do music, I get very sad very quickly. So it's a release of a lot of emotions, but what comes out is actually lots of jokes. So and song titles, it's usually when I think about someone, like Camille from Om. It's this lady who worked at Om, and she was always friendly to me. And one day I was just feeling very happy, and I thought of her, and I made this track, and that's how it happened. And or 30 intros in a row. It's about someone posting a not so nice review about my live set. But it was nice. 30 intros in a row. It's still like I created some kind of emotion. But I guess it's more. There's a lot of irony and stuff. So I guess it's from serious to jokes and the same thing. So yeah.
And I understand there's also a lot of that you also use a lot of gear in your process recently, and I'm wondering why do you feel that's I mean, that's still relevant, or just why do you why did you pick why did you choose to work with gear, or what's the upsides to gear or something like that?
Well, actually, I use predominantly Ableton, and I build a lot of drum racks inside Ableton and effects. But I guess my ideas of gear come from when I was playing bass in noise bands, punk bands, and there was a lot of pedals. So I use kind of effects. So to me, actually, it's very simple setup. It will be Ableton with a lot of different samples. I record a lot of my voice and turn it into different stuff, and then add amps and effects. So it's almost like I took that girl who liked punk music put it into Ableton. That's what happened. So the gear, but I'd love to go more into gear and buy more actual physical machines. And I have done. I bought one, probably the most complicated work. It's a German drum machine, Rave Evolution 309. And it literally has everything in it, and no one knows how to use it, including me. So I don't know. I'm kind of stuck a little bit on that, but it's more digital I am about. So.
But you're now you're sort of discovering this new piece of gear, or just including it in your creative process now, or?
I mean, I'm trying to discover it,
Okay.
but literally no one knows. And YouTube videos don't help because we do introduction, and then the most important part, that video doesn't not available. And I keep asking lots of people who make all different kind of music how to use this machine, and no one knows. And
Okay.
yeah, so hopefully one day. When I was buying it, I bought a second hand. I went to this guy's studio, and he showed it to me. I was like, "This sounds amazing. Can I use it in the week?" He was like, "Probably not." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I had it for 3 months, and I still don't know how to use it. But it's as I said, I don't see music as work. I see it as a game. So to me, I just have to, played a bit harder with that
Okay.
machine, and yeah, I'm sure it will be my best friend soon, ish.
Then how would you describe your approach to DJ sets? I mean, like um, technically and I guess philosophically.
I'm not a DJ. I
Okay.
a lot of people. Well, I play around. I've got some vinyl, and the vinyl I get because it's kind of expensive um, hobby, and I guess that's what I call it for myself. But I always go to specific record store in Berlin, Bikini Wax Records, which is like one of my favorite because when I went there, and sometimes it could be quite scary going into music store and record stores, and there I walked in and they said, "Do you want a cup of tea?" And I'm like, yes. And they have a section with €1 section, and I just go and buy like pretty much like just random vinyl. And that's my philosophy, just buy random vinyl from €1 section, and then you get invited to play and you say, I'm going to play experimental set. Do you understand? And they're like, yeah, yeah, sure. And then you just like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Okay.
So that's my philosophy.
Okay.
It's fun, you know. But hopefully I want to go into next step, maybe do a hybrid. There's like my live set and including other people's music, but that's something in the future.
Okay. But what do you but you also make like DJ mixes. I mean, not live, but for radios and so on. And what is your approach to those? I mean, technically, and also, I guess, where do you look for music to include in these mixes?
Okay, this mix has happened by accident a lot of time, and a lot of people keep asking me, which is, it's nice. And it's usually me at home looking at Ableton, looking at tracks, trying to mix them together and trying and trying. So like 1 hour mix can take like 6 hours for me to try to make it sound okay or even listenable. And how I find music, SoundCloud is a very interesting place, and now a lot of people send me stuff. And by just discovering and looking and what people listen in, and sometimes I can spend hours and hours and hours on SoundCloud because it's recommend stuff, and I found very interesting stuff. You find a label and then like new stuff, and you start following that label and you discover a whole catalog, and it's some little label from Chile who releasing like 5 cassettes, and we're very excited because you found the track. And I tried to repost it and Twitter about it, hashtag about it everywhere because I'm so obsessed with digital things. So I try to spread the word if I find something interesting. There's so much beautiful, interesting music out there from around the world. That's
Okay.
how you do it.
But in your mixes that I've listened to, there's also a lot of things from the the past. So like a lot of I don't know, just found interesting music from I don't know the 90s or something. Um, so I guess I'm wondering what what's your relationship with um, the the music from the past, I guess, in a sense, like, do you feel that looking to the past is important for your musical progress, or is it inspiring for you?
Well, first thing is I'm quite old.
Okay.
So a lot of his music is actually something I grew up with. And from the past, I guess it's just fun. I don't know, like Depeche Mode or Erasure can never get old. So it's like,
Okay.
and from there you again find stuff and maybe go to thrift stores in different cities and find vinyl or cassette rack and just pick up something and then go home, listen, and you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Go or start reading about histories of music genres or certain band, and then suddenly you start coming up with all this interesting stuff. And also listening to other people's mixes. There's a lot of stuff that people put that I find inspirational, and often I write and ask, or if there is a track ID, go and research. So that's how. Yeah, I'm just interested in general about music, so it's natural.
Okay. But like on the other side of things, I guess, how do you see the future of club music? Do you feel that people are now more receptive to new and experimental sounds as like more than they were, I don't know, 10 years ago or something? At least in the club, I mean.
Well, I guess it all depends on which club, you know. Maybe some clubs we didn't know about and it was actually underground and it's always been accepted, but we start finding out, like for me, electronic music only really happened from 2010, 2011. I started taking notice, so it's so much I didn't know, and obviously places I never went to. It's very hard to say. I guess there's certain things come in fashion and goes out of fashion, or the sound of certain drum machine or production. It's also like become very accessible to make electronic music, so a lot of people are able to do it. Like 20 years ago, not every 12 years old kid could make music in the bedroom. It would be a very expensive hobby to buy samples and drum machines. So there's a lot of things happening. It's definitely landscape changes, but I don't know what's gonna happen next and what comes in fashion. I hope GABA comes back in fashion. I just want every club to play GABA.
But are you, I guess, what you mentioned right now about these, about like, 12-year-olds now being able to just download Ableton and experiment for themselves with whatever plugin they find on the internet and so on. I mean, are you optimistic about the future, also about the not just club-based music, but just with I guess people exploring music in their homes. I mean, with this sort of experimental approach to sound being more accessible and things like that.
I think it's a beautiful thing that 12 years old can download Ableton and make music. I mean, it's very positive thing, and I think there's a lot of new things will be happening and a lot of experimentation and energy and the sound. So I think, to answer your question about how I feel about it, I feel very, very positive, and I'm glad like it's more accessible to a lot of people. And I think it's going to change the sounds, and people will be discovering new things and try to create something different, because we all always try to kind of stand out, and be recognized for something. So I think it's very interesting times we live in now.
That's what I just wanted to ask. If you think if you think it's like if it's a good time for an experimental artist now, or an independent artist like yourself, is it do you think it's a good time, or a good, like, sort of I guess economic space or something like that?
Well, it's hard to answer this question, because I guess if you make art, you will always make it whatever time it is. I don't think there is a good time to make art. Okay, today at 6 o'clock is a good time for me to make art. It's just, I think it happens, and obviously it depends on your personal situation, where you are located and what's happening with you around. That will influence you.
I mean, just like in relation to
technology.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to technology also, and in relation to like how it's like for independent artists today with I guess platforms like Shape, for example. I mean, do you think that do you think Shape and other platforms like it is a good way of providing space for innovative music? I mean, or is it? Do you think that there's something lacking in like these sort of the organization of independent music?
Well, I think technology gives you option to be discovered. So you don't actually have to have like a physical cassette to for someone from I don't know, from Brazil to hear your music. They can do it like online, and if we have funding, they can book you, or if we got the financial stuff, we can book you to play. And that's really interesting how, you know, before it was all about like making, you know, to be able to come across to wider audience. But Shape platform, and it give me incredible opportunities, and they select me to be artist for 2017, and now I'm playing 6 festivals and being also promoted across all these festivals and other platforms. I think we need more Shape platforms, definitely, and the opportunity gives is, it's very valuable. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, and I never knew like a few years back that my, you know, GABA making music 6 in the morning in my headphones will get me here, and it's a beautiful thing, and I'm very, very grateful to be here. So I think we need these platforms and more support. I don't know, from organizational point, there's always issues with political and financial, and, you know, who you know, not what you know, but it's something I can't really comment about because I'm not in Shape platform organizational. I've been selected as an artist, so I don't know what's going on there behind.
Okay. But what do you, I guess, what do you think about these political aspects of club culture? How do you see the future of marginalized groups in electronic music, which are, you know, like being talked about a lot lately, or specifically women in club culture? I mean, what's your experience so far, and are you optimistic about that?
Yeah, that's it's important to be. It's a question about visibility and opportunities, and it's almost like convincing people to book new talent, and from all walks of lives and all genres and genders, and it's difficult, and a lot of time, you know, people ask me what's it like to be a woman in music, and I'm like, well, don't you want to talk about my GABA tracks? You want to talk about me being a woman? And it's difficult, but it's important we talk about it, and we talk about it now, and it's good this conversation start happening more, and even a lot of negative publicity and positive it's good to be this. It's happening, the attention happening, and there's a shift happening in club culture, but it will be nice to see it happening on a bigger scale. But I think, you know, seeing women in position, management position and curating position is so admirable and so important. So I think change is happening, and I'm hopefully part of this change, and hopefully inspire other people to like do music and create.
It also sort of seems that recently a lot of these new and experimental sounds, for example, all this so-called deconstructed club music and so on, sort of goes hand in hand with political statements and sentiments, and I mean, a lot of it also comes from marginalized ethnic groups, and it's therefore often very politically charged. But I've never really perceived your music as very explicitly political. So I'm wondering if you think of your music as political.
I think there's a lot of irony in the name I selected, Machine Woman.
Okay.
So there's a lot of irony in the song titles, but not everyone can see it. So maybe that can answer your question.
So you're sort of saying that like these statements, that if you're making them, they're not so overt, they're not so explicit, but they're more like subliminal statements, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Um, by the way, if anyone has any questions, I think you can all just like drop in or whatever.
Don't forget existential crisis right now on stage, so be gentle.
Um, I'm sort of, okay. Um, I don't know if this is. Do you feel the use of these sort of and innovative sounds and experimental like song structures is a good tool for forwarding the message of these marginalized groups? I mean, because there sort of seems to be this correlation now. Like, do you think it's? I mean, how do you feel about this correlation of, I mean, experimental sounds and sort of, I guess, progressive statements or something like that?
I think this is a big debate,
Okay.
who uses the experimental sound, because I think it's a lot of different artists from different backgrounds do that. So I can't specifically comment about this. Like if that being experimental artist, you send some kind of message.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't answer that because I think it comes from very different artists who,
Yeah.
from different groups, not from specific group.
Yeah. Then I guess maybe from your, I guess, personal experience, would you say that just do you think that just the complexity of your sound, or just the complexity of your performances is like correlated to your politics, or like your outlooks or something like that?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm really not sure how my performance. It's before my performance, I get super nervous. I don't think about anything. Literally, I get completely. I don't like when people talk to me before performance, and after I feel relief. So I really don't know what I'm doing on stage when I'm performing. So
Okay.
I can't comment about that.
So it's, as you said, it's more of a like really intuitive thing. Like,
Yes.
okay. It's like this is sort of the last or next to last question. How do you see the future of your work, and do you intend on exploring any specific genres in the near future or anything like that apart from GABA?
It's all about GABA.
Okay.
For me, it's gonna be next 10 albums gonna be just pure Rotterdam inspired GABA.
Okay.
I don't know, because it's like a game, so I'm playing and whatever takes my fancy. But recently I've been missing maybe doing more melodies and creating something, I don't know, more poppier sound and like bigger sound, and collaborate with more musicians with me. But at the same time, every time I have that idea and I sit down in front of Ableton and I start making something at 220 BPM, and I'm like, yeah, that's not that's not what I wanted to do. So it just happens, and you can't force it. It's like that certain process. You can't force it.
And at the risk of being a generic, what do you have planned for tomorrow night? Instead of GABA.
Oh, instead of tomorrow, well, as I said, I don't know what I'm doing when I'm on stage, so no one knows.
Okay. No one knows. Okay.
It's gonna be a surprise for me as well.
Okay, cool. If anyone has any questions, I guess. Okay, then thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi. Hey. Hello. First of all, I would like to say hi and welcome to everybody. Especially, it's a great pleasure to meet and to have Uwe Schmid, aka Atom TM, aka Atom Heart, aka so many more names right here, right now in Pritličje. Hi.
Hello, thank you.
So yeah, let's start with the question that arises right away with having so much names, with having so much production done. Um, your production varies from more of a home and concert oriented compositions maybe to like more club functional tracks. Would you agree with that for starters?
I would, yes.
Yes.
Hmm.
Is this something you consciously think about when producing, and when how does that maybe affect your producing or creative process?
Well, of course, there's always a purpose in the creation. I think I spend more time thinking about the music I make than actually making them. So I think, of course, a lot about where the track goes. Does it go on a CD? Does it go on vinyl? Does it go digital? What does the format enable me to do, and where does it eventually go? So I'm very interested in functional music, tracks, call it techno or whatever, and I'm very interested in non-functional music, which or actually music that tries to re-establish the place. It's not necessarily listening music. It can be music for maybe unknown moments or unknown situations, and all that is interesting to me. Like I don't see myself being limited to one format or one type of musical expression.
But is the difference between making one or another? Like, do you get to that consciously? Do you like
I hope so.
Is it yes? I mean, do you like this? Is let's say you're in your living room and thinking about this track, and there's an idea, there's something flowing around, and then you connect it with the format, or how does that work?
This question is rather about like the general creative process. Then, um, normally it's a little bit like I'm collecting all kinds of ideas that range from maybe simple musical ideas like a pattern, a sound, a structure, or a feeling. Um, at the same time, I'm collecting maybe broader ideas, maybe the function of a whole album, or the color theme of the artwork, or photography or typography, or letters, meaning. All that kind of stuff is like happening at the same time, and very often these elements at some point start to cluster. Um, there may be I have fragments of music laying around somewhere on a hard disk. There are fragments I carry around with me since 20 years maybe, like little elements, a sound or a loop or something I like at some point, and every now and then I go back to it and I listen to it and I decide whether it's still valid or not, and maybe eventually I'll erase it or not. And every now and then these things just like cluster to bigger ideas, and there's always like this moment where it clicks, and suddenly like the idea for a track or for a collection of tracks just becomes clear to me. Like this, it has to be this or that or this or that, and then I immediately know whether I don't know if it's a functional track or how functional, or I'm pretty aware of the subtleties of. I did a lot of, for example, functional tracks which are subversively unfunctional. Like you would think they are functional, but they're totally not. And others, I tried to make as functional as possible, and I failed maybe. So there's all kind of things happening, or maybe sometimes in the process of making something functional, I realize it's not such a great idea, and I would abandon it. But the whole process of creation, I think, is very, very conscious. There's there's very little unconscious creation, I think.
No, not so intuitive as far as jamming out and just trying out things. Then it's all about the idea and spreading it out to the actual end piece, which is a track.
There are lots of moments of, I would say, intuition, where intuition has come into play. There are a lot of, there's one example of one of my last albums called HD. There's a track on it which is called Strom, which I had the idea about that track standing on the dance floor at a festival in Japan, and the whole track kind of like appeared in my head. It was totally clear what to do in a second, and I went home and I did the whole track in maybe 3 or 4 days because everything was clear. Every detail was clear. But I knew that at the very end of the track there had to be a section which I could not logically construct, but it had to be improvised. Which is at the very end there's like a sequence going on which I couldn't really fully logically describe as what I wanted. I just knew the feeling of what I wanted, but I didn't know how to produce it. I knew it would have to come up somehow. So I did the whole track in a very almost mechanic fashion. And then I was waiting for the moment to appear that I could improvise that last piece. And it didn't work. I tried to get myself into that state where you can improvise. So I went to a studio, I tried to improvise, and this last piece didn't happen. And I almost abandoned the whole idea. I was like, okay, then the track is like 1:30 shorter. So bad luck. It didn't work. And I had pretty much finished the track, and I was about to mix it a couple of weeks later. And I went to a studio again to do something completely different, a completely different project, different track. And I had a certain piece of equipment connected, and it just this weird moment where I thought, maybe I should now try to do this. And I hit play, and it was a random sequence selected on the machine. And I hit play, and I let the other track play, and it worked perfectly. And I was like, okay, rec, done. And it was, I don't know why. And this moment was completely intuitive. There was nothing. I was trying actually consciously to go into that state of where you're not thinking about anything concrete, but more like you want the feeling of it. And I try to allocate that type of situations. To me, making music and being creative is not one simple thing. It's not like thinking or it's all kind of different situations, and it's very mood dependent or situation dependent. Sometimes you go to a studio and nothing works, and then I just clean up the hard disks, or I don't know, label floppy disks or something like that. And other days are completely different. Then I want to go just to clean up the studio, and I end up making a track. So I think it's very important for me to be open to those different, sensibilities maybe.
Is that something that came with your experience, or is it something that you started off with? Let's say with Lassie Benhouse, that's how you pronounce it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it earlier. It's actually a made-up word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how was it in the beginnings? Is that something you really, got into with years and years of experience, or is that something that it was always just boiling up in your, mind and try to get out?
I had a moment I remember very well. The very first album I did and the very first EPs, I like we talked about before briefly. I had not really any experience in producing music or making music. Everything I had learned pretty much on, while doing it, like getting equipment, trying to figure it out, going into a studio, never been to a studio. And I got into this workflow of making the first album, which took me maybe 2 or 3 years. in not all the time working on it, but like on and off. But every time my preoccupation was to work on this album. And I really got into that workflow, creative flow over like 2-3 years. And there was one moment which I had not thought about it at all, which was the day after I had delivered the master. So I woke up and I had nothing to do. And I realized, oh, I hadn't thought about it. You know, I actually finished everything I wanted to finish. So what's next? And it took me like a week to think about it, what I would actually want to do now. And that was the moment I realized it was very important for me to not only do the stuff I do, but also think about the stuff I want to do afterwards or parallel to that. So pretty quickly I developed some kind of method where I started to, like I described before, to work on a lot of things in a parallel manner. And while I may start with something, I'm finishing something else, or I just collect stuff without knowing where it goes. But basically, my idea is never to be like in a creative void. That's what basically is my method. So I like to have be productive as much as possible. I don't like to be like I said before. If I go to a studio with a certain idea and it doesn't work, then I can always go to another idea which requires something maybe much more mechanical. Not everything has to be is creative in a creative sense, in a strict sense. A lot of creation means making. That's creation isn't like always like having ideas. Creation sometimes is just sitting there and doing something very boring for a very long time. But knowing that this is, and you said Senior Coconut, for example, Senior Coconut has an incredible amount of boring labor involved. Knowing that, also like reflecting upon it beforehand, I think it's very important to know where you are in your creative process. What does the idea you have really need or mean? Where do you want to go? What's the way to go there? What do I need? And how much work is there? Or how little work is there? And I think it's important to be conscious about that when you're working.
And that was maybe my next question was, is maybe one of the ways you're trying to avoid the void of not being able to produce, just trying to produce all kinds of music, not classifying yourself into any genres or any brackets. Is that one of the ways you avoid that? Just have all of the canvas in front of you and not limit yourself with genre or for that matter.
I've never really thought about genre. To me, only genre is important as a subject of deconstruction or as a subject of questioning. Like to me, any genre, not only in music, is the moment you zoom into a genre. Like let's say with Senior Coconut, it's a little bit like this. You say cha cha cha, and you go like, yeah, sure. And then you start to dissect it, and suddenly it's like falling apart. So the genre itself is like more like a subject of experimentation to me.
Really sorry to interrupt you, but for those who might not know, should we explain what Senior Coconut project is and what you did with it?
Senior Coconut was a project which had become relatively famous, I would say, from like the year 2001 onwards for like maybe 10, 15 years. And it was Latin music. It all started with a cover album of Kraftwerk songs, but covered in a classical Latin music style, very, very focused on the 40s and 50s Latin music sound, mainly cha-cha-cha and that type of stuff. But the very first, the second album, which turned into the famous one, was, like I said, Kraftwerk songs, but I cut and pasted out of samples. It was hardly really played or produced. So I took my Latin American music collection and cut it into pieces, which took a very long time. Like I took I don't know, maybe 20 Paris Prado albums, and I cut every single element I thought was usable, like from a conga hit to a loop to a trumpet to anything. And I classified all that in a sampler, which is a machine, I don't know, of that size, you know. This was 20 years ago, where the sampler had maybe 32 megabyte. That was like all you could fit in there. So the idea was to build Kraftwerk songs out of samples I had taken out of other music and like layer it and put it back together. So it's a lot of cutting and editing and labeling and blah, 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 and thinking about it. And it's very tedious work. This was before digital editing. Like everything is programmed in MIDI, and like I said before, I would never ever want to do this again. If I'm now looking at it, and I think this was totally crazy to do it. But I was sitting there for many weeks, just like cutting saxophone samples. Like it's really insane work. But then I knew, okay, first I have to really do this. This boring. I have to go through this boring process and classifying samples, and I have to know where the samples are. I have to know, that they exist, so I can start to compose with them. And then I put the Kraftwerk tracks back together out of samples. So actually, it sounds pretty played, I think, in a way. It's hard for me to say because I did it, but a lot of people were fooled by it, at least. So the whole thing had to do with, I was very interested in simulation, in simulating really something, and the effect of a simulation as compared to the effect of an original or of reality. So I was very interested in Flanger. The project of Flanger happened around the same time when with Bernd Friedman we simulated a jazz trio or quartet basically, but also like all within a couple of machines. So basically this is an example of how a very creative process, because the idea of Sine Cogna is very simple. It's it used to be Latin music, samples, Kraftwerk. That's it. So it's very simple as an idea, but the process is like technically was a little bit insane.
Yeah, and you just maybe mentioned it, but no, that was maybe my next question was, so the approach to the actual production with Flanger that was formed in the late 90s with Bernd Friedman,
Yes.
like you said, was pretty much the same, except for you were trying to emulate the acoustic jazz band. Yeah, but the idea was the same, just a different approach, different genre.
The ideas are always very, in my opinion, a good idea is always very simple. Like when people ask me about the creative process and how ideas come about, the idea is a very simple thing always. In case of Flanger, the first album we did in in around 98, I think it was. It was done with a very little piece of equipment actually, and the idea was to make to make 1 minute of non-repetitive music in the style of jazz per day. That was the idea. So we didn't want to repeat ourselves, and we invented a method of how to produce the music with a couple of pieces of equipment. And basically what we did, we programmed a couple of seconds. We recorded stereo, and then we erased everything we did before. So you finish maybe 20 seconds of a composition, and you cannot go back to what you just did. So you have to start again and compose the next 20 minutes. Talking about when I erase, I mean erasing the structure, the composition, not the sounds maybe. So you force yourself into non-repetition. You can't ever repeat that moment. You record 20, 30 seconds, and then you go, to the next 20, 30 seconds, and so on and so on. And maybe after a minute or 2 minutes, you realize that it worked or didn't work. So that the process as well in making music, in my opinion, the process itself is sometimes more important than the result. Sometimes the results are, like in case of Senior Coconut or Flanger, I would say the process had a fruitful result. But very often now, looking back at stuff I did, I think I value much more the process than the result in many, many things I did.
And how does that production translate into performing it? Flanger, let's say. How does the track, what you did, what you cut off, and did together, how does that translate into performing it live?
The first 3 albums were not performable, I would say, and we did not actually want to perform them. We very often, to me, making music is I don't really think about performing music. To me, these are two different things. There's music you construct, and there's music you can perform. To me, live performance is a pretty different situation from a studio creation moment, I would say. And with Flanger, we just wanted to make the music, and we didn't think at all about live performance. And then afterwards, we came up with different things to play live, a different type of music to play live. So what we do live, the stuff we're going to play tomorrow is probably closer to the last album than anything we did before in that relationship.
And you did your first live performance back in 1989, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things have changed from then,
Mm-hmm.
from music consumption, industry, audience, technology. How do you see that change with performing? How did you experience it?
You mean my personal
Yes,
perspective? I like the 21st century, I have to say. Like when I look back at the first shows I played, and maybe even most of the shows I played during the 90s, I often say, well, electronic music artists had to play on shitty rock PAs and disco PAs, basically. So everything I think was suboptimal, really. As an electronic music artist, like normally you make music in the studio, and then I don't know, back in the 90s, you put it on, or you try to reproduce that in a club or in a live environment, and it's not really sounding that great. So fortunately, like, technology has really improved in that sense, and I really like the modern technology of the modern sound systems that are available. Talking about Berghain, for example, this is for the first time. Maybe 10 years ago, I played a concert or show where I had the feeling it's the way it should be for electronic music, because electronic music has a very different how do you say, it's a very different energy than, I don't know, rock music or pop music. It's a completely different thing. And when you play, like, I don't know, let's say techno music on a rock PA in a rock club, you're gonna end up playing more rock than techno. I think you go more towards that energy, which is more, I don't know, distorted, rough. It's more about I don't know, distortion and that kind of energy. If you ever have played with an analog drum machine on a really good high-end sound system, you know that the music you had listened to before until now is like really not. It's something completely different. And so, in my opinion, I'm very happy with how things went on the technology side of things. And even looking at the audience, I mean, even you have much more specialized audiences now than you had 20 years ago, which if you're lucky, you can play for a really, really good audience on a really good sound system in a great environment. Like in the 90s, it was much more like a Russian roulette kind of thing. You could be there with a good audience, but the sound system was shit, and everything was a little bit more freestyle, I would say, which not always is good. At the same time, nowadays you have much more, because of internet and all that, much more of a classification of what's going on. Like people immediately classify, and they don't go to a place or to an artist. They don't feel they belong to that classification. This is a little bit boring, like this kind of roughness that used to happen in the early days. You go somewhere, you don't know what's going on. Like the early days of techno were a lot like that. There was like a rave somewhere in a warehouse, and you had no idea who the artists were and what's going to happen. This is a little bit, you still have that, but much less than in the past. So I think it's you have these both sides of the coin. But in general, I'm pretty happy with how things are in that aspect.
But if we're already touching on techno subject, let's say, it used to be, especially in the 90s, the sound of the future, the sci-fi. As far as the movement goes, it used to be like this apolitical movement that where nothing but the moment and the present would matter. Whereas today it's an industry. It's an industry. Sorry. How do you feel about that? What's your perspective on the whole genre moving towards the mainstream and being just one of the products, the hyper production of music, the generic sounding tracks that are coming out every single day by artists. A lot of good stuff, but
well, I would expand that reflection upon a culture itself. I would not stop with music. I think in music it's maybe a little bit more evident, but you have that everywhere. There's a very nice book by Jean Baudrillard, a French philosopher, who wrote that book in the early 90s, and he said the book is called "The Year 2000 Will Not Happen," and he talks about the lack of horizon after the year 2000. So when humanity has crossed a certain limit, and the year 2000 as kind of like this sci-fi horizon, it's like really far away. As long as we can talk about the year 2000, we can project, we can be futuristic. And interestingly, with music and with art in general, as well with politics, it's the same. Or in general with all human expressions, everything was possible until like the year 2000 or 2001, and then in my opinion in music it can completely erase everything that happened between 2000 and 2010 that didn't exist. Like it's like a big creative nothingness where you look at it and you go like, this is 10 years, are you sure? Nothing happened in those 10 years except of maybe you refining something. You can say it's like a mannerism, kind of like things are getting a little bit better in quality, but they're not getting better in content or in vision. And one of the reasons why I wasn't very interested in techno was exactly that around the year 94, 95. I had always considered techno, to call it like that, as a stepping stone somewhere else. To me, it was never the thing. Like I never said, oh, this is techno, that's what I want to do. It was more like, okay, that's incredible, let's continue. And suddenly the whole thing just like froze and stopped and became mainstream, and it got a name, it got a classification, and that was it. So I completely distanced myself from that. And only maybe like I said, maybe 10 years ago, I realized that I decided to go back to techno because I did not like the idea that something I had been part of in the beginning had been taken from me because it was ruined by somebody else. And I was like, I have all the right to do that, you know, to go back to that, and work and keep working on the idea I had maybe 20 years ago that had never really happened, had never really been fulfilled. And to me, the interesting thing about techno is you can take the whole genre of techno and consider it as being one track. There's only one techno track. Like everybody who has ever made techno has just made one track. It's always like that. It's like this weird core idea of what techno is, like the feeling of it. There's never been. I mean, it's very different from any other kind of music. You could not say the same thing about jazz or rock. But techno, every techno artist, I think, has always been interested in that very simple, functional idea of that very track you have maybe listened to or you would like to listen to. And that's a little bit like in my opinion, that's still very futuristic because the core idea of techno, of the techno track, we haven't still arrived, I think. So I'm very enthusiastic about call it the future of techno or something like that.
And your approach has always been super unique, super minimalistic. Even today, when a lot of people go back to, you know, just trying to be as raw and as hard and back to the rave times, you and I feel especially you with Tobias Freund, you guys have a completely different approach to performing as well as producing music. And you guys are actually performing Saturday in Berghain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe how does that night and even how does that night and approach to that night differ from the night you're playing tomorrow, which is a completely different thing?
Well, first of all, I'm not playing by myself with Tobias, yeah. So that's a big difference. The thing with Tobias is we improvise 100%. There's almost nothing pre-structured or pre-prepared. We are preparing material, but I don't know what he has made or what he doesn't know what I have made. And it's we sometimes even don't know how to start the set. Like we would go on stage and there would be silence, and then Tobias would say, "How should we start?" And I don't know. And somebody goes like, "Oh, maybe like this, beep," and that's how it starts. And then everything goes from there. And it's very much about the moment. It's club music. That's a very specific thing. It's improvised club music. So it has a lot to do with dancing, with moving. And for the same reason, it's very important to establish some kind of connection with the audience. And we always try to reach to that point where we enter into like some kind of feedback with the audience. It's like we play instruments and we play the PA, we play the sound system to talk to the people. And there's always this moment where it kind of clicks. You're looking for something and you're still not there. And then suddenly it clicks and you can feel that the whole room kind of like starts to make sense. And that's basically what we're looking for. So it's always a risk because it depends on a lot of factors, on how we feel that day, the sound system, the audience. There are many little things that can go wrong. And but at the same time, this is like very exciting to do because it's like really like opening a parachute. You jump, and you don't know what's going to happen. And then we trust each other completely. Like we that's very different what I meant from playing alone in a club. When you're playing alone in a club and it's about function, you have to reach that point where that thing has to work. Being by yourself, and if you're not a DJ, if you can't go back to a tool, something, a record, something that works in a club. You know it works. If you don't do that, if you play music live by yourself, it's a little bit more difficult, I would say. It's a little bit more intense and yeah, complicated. With Tobias, it's we have gone so far. I think the longest show we played was 7 hours. And at Berghain on Saturday we're going to play 5 hours, which again is like a very a special thing to have 5 hours or 6 hours, because you completely can outline the space and the time differently than, let's say, with 2 hours. And it's very special to play with him. I think same as he would, I think, say the same about me. Like being on stage with him is completely it's magic. We don't talk. We don't know what we're gonna do before. Like I said, we just go on stage and hit play, and then if I have a difficult time, I know he's there, and vice versa.
And tomorrow you're doing a solo at Atom TM G&D show in Kino Šiška, which features the tracks of Grand Loop EP released on Bunker New York, if I'm correct?
Yeah,
or is
the original set was started from that collection of tracks, maybe 5-6 years ago. And the set itself has mutated since then. Like after, I don't know, after playing a certain amount of material, a certain type of material for a certain time, it stops being interesting to perform. So I keep like renovating the material. It has changed quite a lot since then, I would say.
Would you say the core samples are the same, and what makes maybe those samples so interesting that you decided to make a whole G&D show based on that?
I rather see like the EP and that moment when the EP came out and the music I did as a starting point to develop that type of set, you know. I think it has rather little to do with the EP. I think, yeah.
Was it maybe vice versa? You started thinking about live and then EP emerged on top of that?
I don't remember really. Possible, yeah, possible.
So what can we maybe expect for tomorrow? Flanger as well as Atom TM, Kino Šiška. Completely different shows from what you've told us so far. It's different. What can we expect from you?
Well, both are, I would say, semi-improvised. With Bernd, we are improvising and playing material from the last album and the last EPs. So everything is based upon material we have used on the albums for production. We extracted bits and pieces. It's rhythmically very different. It's all, I would say, rhythmically speaking, odd. It's different meters we use and different kind of time signatures. And since I play with him, like Bernd, in a different sense than Tobias, he's as well a person I appreciate a lot, not only as a friend but also like as a creative spirit, and I think maybe it's the same for him as well. Like when we're on stage, we more like complement each other. I don't really know where he's going, and he doesn't know where I'm going, and we're trying to figure out that common ground on stage and make a certain idea work. It's a little bit the same as with Tobias. There's always this kind of like drifting. You're drifting around and you want to go somewhere, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And for my solo show, it's as well like that. It's a lot of loose material, and I have a specific, more like a specific energy in mind. With Flanger, it's less so. It's not so much about an energy. It's more about maybe a feeling. But for my solo set, it has more to do with a club than with a concert, I would say. So that's more the inspiration.
It's gonna definitely be interesting seeing both of them tomorrow, Kino Shishka, in the same place as well. So
Yes.
it's gonna be a cool and weird and nice contrast. Um, we're running out of time, I think. So if anybody has maybe a question or two, yeah, go for it.
Did I what again? Hmm? Hmm? Ah. Well, I never realized that. um, the story goes that I started to play drums in the basement of the building I was living because I wanted to play drums. And I was maybe 14 or 15. And I never had any idea of, I never really wanted to make music. Like, I never had any idea, any plan. It was more like a kid playing around. And I was very interested. I wasn't even interested in playing in a band or anything like that. So I was just playing for myself. And I listened to the radio, and there was certain music I found inspiring, and it was all rhythmical music. And so I listened to a certain song. I listened to the drummer in that song, and then I tried to figure out how the rhythm is working. So I went to the basement and I played for a couple of hours. And there was one moment in the early 80s when I heard a drum machine on the radio. And I knew that there were drum machines, but they all sounded like drum machines. They all sounded like crickets. But there was one drum machine which was the first digital drum machine, which sounded like a real drummer, but it was programmed. And I immediately realized that this was not a human being. It sounded like a human being, but it was too perfect. And I was really impressed by the fact that we can make rhythms that are more perfect than what a human performance could ever achieve. And I felt a little bit ridiculous practicing patterns in the basement. And I was like, what am I doing here with a drum kit? And I sold it, and I bought like a very small, cheap drum machine, which I programmed in my bedroom when I was 14, until I had like nothing more. The whole thing was like done, and I realized that this what I was doing with the drum machine actually existed. That there was music that was programmed, and but I had not really a lot of knowledge about the history of electronic music, of anything like that. Like, of course, this was pre-internet and all that. So the music I knew was the music that came out of the radio, or the music I could find in a record shop, buying vinyl and so on. And then I changed school when I was around 16, and I came to a new school, and all the kids were different, from different social backgrounds, and a lot of like these kids listened to underground music, which was back then music made on cassettes, like pre-industrial. And I suddenly realized that there is a whole thing there. I just knew of radio music, and then suddenly like this whole universe appeared of people making, I don't know, industrial music and pre-industrial music, and this was like pre-techno, of course. And it just turned out that this was the stuff that most inspired me, like programming. I was like very interested in sequences and programming, in rhythms and all that. So the first albums I did, like you mentioned, Lasik Bandhaus, they were all basically rhythms and sequences. There was nothing melodic in there, really. I wasn't interested in harmonies or melodies or anything like that. And I never really thought about making this alive or anything like that. I was just like playing around. And then a friend of mine from that new school I went to, he listened to some of the stuff I was recording on a 4-track tape recorder I was just like recording stuff for myself. And he said, "Oh, maybe you should make a record." And this was like 86, and I was like, "Why would anybody want that? Why should I make a record?" And he really insisted, and I had no idea that this was even like possible. To me, like a record is like something, I don't know, Bonnie M is making records, but not me, you know. And he really insisted, and he looked for a studio, and he looked for a publisher, and he figured out, you know, what are the components of making music, the production, and so on and so on. And because of him, basically, I ended up recording that album, and then and I was going to university. I was studying still, and then we released it, and that was the moment where I said, and then I woke up and I realized maybe I should do something another one. And it was a moment where in Frankfurt, where I was living at that time, a lot of labels appeared, and like techno was about to appear, and there was a big like independent music scene, and it was very easy to make vinyl and CDs, because there were a lot of people having record companies, and it wasn't really it wasn't really difficult to make that. So I just continued making music and released making music, and after, I don't know, and then time passes, and then suddenly you have it's like 10 years have passed, and then that's, I guess, what you do.
I wanted to ask you, what was your first piece of equipment, but you answered me that
Mm-hmm.
without my question. So maybe which is your favorite piece of equipment now?
Mm. Um, I like drum machines a lot. Um, and I always come back to one drum machine, which is a Lin 9000 drum machine from '85. It's a sampling drum machine, 8-bit, like really, really big, and really buggy, and doesn't really sound that great. It's not a good sounding drum machine. If you know Stock Aitken Waterman, the producers from the 80s, Kylie Minogue, and that kind of stuff. That's an Lin 9000. Um, it's a very unfashionable drum machine, but it's kind of magical. Like, it's just a lot of fun to work with it. Like, you turn it on, you put stuff in there, and I end up recording things. I just want to hear it. I just turn it on, I want to hear it, and I end up recording things. I like machines from this era where strange human beings made strange pieces of equipment. This is a little bit something I miss about today. Like, everything is way too much industry. Like, if you buy a piece of equipment, it's like a well-produced, well-marketed, targeted. Like, you're talking about Ableton. It's a piece of equipment made already for certain kind of people in mind, and which I think is a big problem in electronic music specifically. That you buy a piece of equipment that already gives you the answers you could probably ask, like, oh, here's the kick drum I need. You know, I like equipment that is mysterious. Like, you turn it on, you don't know what's going on there. What's this function? What is it for? Somebody had a crazy idea. There's a lot of equipment from the 70s and 80s, which was in general in maybe in Europe a moment which was a little bit bizarre. Like, if you look at what was on TV in the 70s or the movies that were made in the 70s, the pieces of equipment that were made in the 70s and 80s are the same. They're a little bit like Klaus Kinski. The Lin 9000 is like Klaus Kinski, yeah, you could say that. It's like unpredictable and weird, but really good. But you wouldn't really want to recommend it to anybody else, you know.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For well, to start with, I'm not doing this since a long time, like changing names. I decided not to do this maybe like 10 years ago. Um, but the time I was doing it, I've always been very interested in a moment in a moment I like about music. When I discovered music, there's very often a moment you discover an artist or a track, and you have no information about this. You don't know where the person is coming from, when it was made, how it was made, why it was made. And by listening to the music, you start to dive into that kind of universe of that other human being, hopefully, that has made that. And I found that always a very big portion of what's going on in your head when you listen to music. So for a long time, when I was having musical ideas, let's say Senior Coconut is an example. I really liked to create a universe with it. That back then, when you made a CD, basically that CD arrives as an object to you randomly sometimes if you're uninformed. And it worked quite well with Senior Coconut, where I even made I invented the characters, the people that are on the cover, and there's fake information on the back. And you basically drop a human being into like a completely false assumption of what it is. And the music you then listen to is completely different than maybe not completely different, but I think it's different from the same music perceived with a different set of information. And for a long time, I liked to play with those parameters. And at the same time, I liked a lot the polarity of making music. Like after, for example, I had made something cheesy, like Senior Coconut. Like I don't know, I would work like maybe half a year on Cha Cha Cha, and then I would need something completely different. And it's like switching poles. It's like really going from one thing to something as opposite as possible. And I would really want to make an album back then that would be, let's say, not funny, kind of cryptical, hard to get. And it would be I would really have a lot of fun doing this, like making something that's difficult to understand and then do something that's easy to understand or allegedly easy to understand. And that's part of what interests me. That to start with, I like making music for myself, but I'm very conscious about the fact that the music eventually communicates to somebody. And every now and then I try to imagine what's going on in the other while I'm making the music. So is there something, you're constantly encoding little bits and pieces, and it's like layers of information in a production that only certain people will decode, or some will never, or there are a lot of like cryptical things nobody ever will know about, which I enjoy a lot to do this. But let's say after I switched from like changing aliases, I had realized that it wasn't maybe from a management point, from a sales point of view, very clever to do that. And I had to explain myself a lot. And I was also a little bit tired of that game, maybe. And I thought like I would just like use one name and make all kinds of different stuff then instead of like changing the name. It's a little bit, it doesn't really matter to me that much, but yeah, I think I'm in general not very happy about being pinned down or having reached at a certain spot and being there. I don't like that. Yeah, not for myself, but especially from the outside, somebody comes and say, "Oh, this is this is blah 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 blah, and you did this, and here's a label, and that's what you're doing. I don't know. I'm German. I don't like that.
Anyone else a specific question? Otherwise, I mean, we could talk for ages here, obviously. But in other case, I would like to thank you, Uwe, for taking the time and visiting us and sharing all your experiences. And I would like to invite all of you to Kino Šiška tomorrow to Vargvales, Flanger, and Atom TM.
Thank you.